This is 9 in 9 Enneagram Wisdom for Life. Let's dive in. Casey, I'm so excited to have you with us today. And I want to begin by just asking, what's your Enneagram story? When did you hear about it? And then how did you know that you were an Enneagram 5?
Well, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. I first heard about the Enneagram at a church that I was going to. They offered an assessment, and so I took it. I was part of a volunteer group, and the leader wanted all of us to take it. And I'm always geeked out about personality assessments and things. So I took it and found out that I was a 5 that way. I don't know if that's the best way through an assessment, but that was how I landed on it. And I might have been clued in to the fact that I was a 5 because after I got the report, I bought like 5 or 6 books about the Enneagram and started reading the chapter on the 5 and started really identifying with phrases like detach and withdraw into the mind and like to be alone and like to be right about things and want to rely on themselves and not need other people or other things. So everything that I read and studied after the assessment and the class that we did at the church just sort of further confirmed that I was a 5. The deeper I went into it, the more I found, and the more I read about other numbers too, I sort of took out by a process of elimination that I wasn't any of those other numbers. So that was how I landed on it and found out.
That's awesome. I love that. You were like, and I bought a lot of books about
Yes.
which is so great. Well, so how do you see, just in a general sense, in your general life, how do you see your 5?
How it kind of plays out in life.
Mhm.
I notice it because when I'm really aware of things, I know that I'm very much in my head and I'm always sort of like constantly assessing what's going on and trying to observe and figure out what's going on. Do I have a part in this? Do I have to have a part in this? And do I have the energy to handle this if I do have a part in it? So there's just that constant assessment of things going on. I noticed it more when I was younger that I had a really strong desire to be right about things. Where I notice it a little bit now is that it's getting better as I've gotten older, but I used to be very hesitant to say anything unless I knew I was right about it. So having that sense of I might not really know the right answer, so I better just stay quiet. I noticed that, like I said, more years ago, but it's something that I try to bring a little more to the forefront that I don't need to be right about this, but I can go ahead and speak if I'm maybe 80% sure. So I noticed that quite a bit, especially at work. Just don't be afraid to speak up, even if you're not sure you're right.
Oh, yeah. So the motive of a 5 of experiencing security and safety through being independent and competent. When you approach the day, like how do you see this desire to be very independent and very competent? You mentioned being right earlier. What does that do for you in your daily life?
So I'm a planner and I like to make a list. So usually what I'll do, and sometimes it's the night before, I'll write down a list of what I need to get done and sort of figure out these are the things that must get done. And then you kind of have to leave room for some interruptions because that usually happens. I don't like that, but that happens. And I think it's just in that planning that you start to see, okay, I have to get this done. I have to get this done. This needs to be right. This needs to be right. Where I see the desire to be right kind of comes in more moment by moment, that the email has to be not just grammatically correct, but has to say the right things, has to be the right length, has to sound like I know what I'm talking about or show that I know what I'm talking about. In meetings, of course, I have to make sure that I'm prepared for those. So I feel like there's probably a lot of preparation that from day to day or then even from moment to moment or meeting to meeting that I just prepare myself for what I think I need to know so that when I go into those meetings, I know that I will have what I need to be competent in those moments.
So I'd love to talk about the core emotion of fear. That is the core emotion for the 5 and the 6 and the 7. And we know that each of the number experiences fear in a kind of, it shows up in different nuanced ways. And so for you as a 5, how does fear play into the undercurrent of your emotions?
There is always fear of being wrong about something, of doing something wrong, of saying something wrong, of getting it wrong, of setting up a plan and not and and not accomplishing it because I sort of feel like, well, I got it wrong. I didn't plan that right. I didn't know how much time it would take, or I was wrong about something. So it usually has to do with being wrong about things. And I think because there's this sort of constant analysis going on in my mind all the time, always, I have to be intentional about this because it would be really easy to just go down a rabbit hole of I could be scared about this or scared about that. And this is unknown. I don't know how this conversation is going to go. If I was not as aware, I think fear would show up a lot more in that way because you can get down a rabbit hole really quickly when your brain is just in constant kind of motion.
That's
So
more
that,
like the
yeah.
Enneagram 6, right?
Kind of, yeah. And I think that's my wing. So I'm sure that that's part of how that shows up.
Yeah.
But that constant, I have to be prepared. And what are those things that could go wrong? And what do I need to do to be prepared for it? And then you sort of, when you play it out in your head, the fear kind of subsides because, like, okay, I know how I would handle that because I figured it out.
See, I think there's a big difference between the 5 and the 6 is that the 5 can go through the thinking process with a healthy thought process and the fear can subside, whereas the 6 has that repressed thinking center, so they can't quite loop back around to the fear subsiding. That's really interesting. The doing, so the thinking is the strongest for the 5. The doing is the repressed. Can you speak to that?
It's really easy to just think things through and then not do them.
Okay.
It's really hard sometimes to get myself up and going, but I think that might also be the fear might also play into that because if I start doing it and get it wrong, then I've gotten something wrong. I've failed at something. So I think that that's a big block to the doing because once I start doing, and especially if it's something I enjoy, then I feel actually more energy. So that helps, but it's just sometimes getting that, like, it's okay if it's not perfect. It's okay if it's not right. It's okay if I get something wrong, I can pivot. But it's hard when you have planned it all out and there are unknown aspects of things. And so I think the fear is part of, for me at least, what stops that doing, or yeah, it plays into that repressed doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it's your strongest center of intelligence. One of the gifts that a 5 brings to the world is this ability to take in a lot of perspectives and a lot of information, and then without a ton of emotion, analyze it and make sense of it. When I want you to think back to like maybe when you were in high school or college, like before you had a career, how did you see that showing up?
Probably in like high school and college when I would think about my schedule. So let me think about high school because I was involved in a little bit more stuff. And I kept everything really separate and really compartmentalized. So the high school experience for me is sort of like a piece of the sports that I was in, and a piece of the speech team I was on, and a piece of the choir that I participated in, and then a piece of the classes, and then some of the social. And I never really felt, other than myself, there wasn't much connection between any, except maybe the person on the track team was also in choir with me. So you compartmentalize that. And as far as like the lack of emotion, I always think, I know that doing is our repressed center, but I always feel like feeling is pretty close to repressed for us too. But it's hard. It's just doesn't feel that natural to put an emotion on a lot of things because you just sort of feel like you're constantly in observation mode. But I think that compartmentalization is part of the how you can take in a lot of information and then sort of make it all make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a gift. And I think people that have 5s in their families or on their work teams or within their friend group, it
Yeah.
really is a benefit to be able to have a person that can see take a bigger, messy picture and then turn it into something that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
That's how it feels safer for us, I think. When it is big and messy and we've got to piece it together, so we take pieces of it and we might feel panic in our minds, but you're not necessarily going to see that on the outside.
yeah. Hey, friends, wherever you are hearing or seeing this video, would you do us a favor and find our podcast on your favorite platform? It's called Living Well by Jen. We're working really hard to put out informative and helpful content about the Enneagram. And one way that you can support us, it's simple, it's free, and it would mean the world, is if you would follow the podcast and give us a 5-star rating or a review. Thanks so much.